Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. As a brief introduction to my presentation here, we're going to be talking about my travels from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to a small African country called Malawi. Touching on also the Florida Everglades and its national park status, Rachel Carson, the formation of the EPA, and the banning of DDT domestically. Teddy Roosevelt will also be spoken about and his conservation first mindset, all wrapped into my thesis here. The Americans' destruction of our environment has permanently damaged some of our nation's most valuable and unique ecosystems. However, through strong conservation policies, environmental education, and responsible stewardship choices, we can protect what remains and restore parts of what we have lost. In 2017, I was privileged enough to go to a small African country called Malawi. Malawi is very similar to America in that, the people there are absolutely lovely. It's referred to as the warm heart of Africa. However, it is extremely impoverished. They're actually one of the most poor nations in the continent. They have been ravaged by colonial superpowers, stripped of natural resources by predatory corporations. However, while I was visiting there, I was privileged enough to experience a truly wild ecosystem. Whenever I was there, I was unfortunately presented with the problem that, I cannot experience something on this scale at home in America. That led me to search to why. Slide, please. Here we'll see a heat map of the Human Influence Index, sort of one of the reasons as to that why. You can see here this large population, this large density of red, which would be a high value of the HII. Southern Florida here, where the Everglades reside, as well as in the Midwest, as well as California, all home to numerous and expansive national parks, limited in how much human influence is actually legally going to occur there. Slide. Starting with the Florida Everglades, at this point, we've lost what we approximate to be half of its historic 11,000 square miles that once called the Everglades, or what we once would have referred to as the Everglades. It's been referred to as, the river of grass and so forth. We're talking about potentially millions of species and micro-ecosystems that have just been wiped off the face of the planet, never to be returned. However, the destruction was halted in 1947 for the most part, with its national park status. It was actually the first national park selected solely for its biodiversity characteristic. Here's Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. She coined the phrase "the river of glass" in her book published in 1947 with the same title. Her quote here: "The Everglades is a test. If we pass it, we may get to keep the planet." Following along with science and making environmental decisions based on presented facts, Rachel Carson, who was a Western Pennsylvania native, she was actually instrumental in identifying the harmful properties of a commercially used and domestically used pesticide known as DDT. Her release of her novel Silent Spring in 1962 actually led to the direct banning of that, as well as the formation of the EPA. However, Rachel Carson was unfortunately passed away soon after the release of the book due to complications from breast cancer. When we talk about DDT and the bioaccumulation of that harmful chemical in the food chain, it's useful to refer to the food chain or the food web almost as a snowball, as organisms at the lower end of that food chain or digest and accumulate that amount of the harmful pesticide or chemical. That snowball effect picks up farther down the food chain, which impacts apex predators at the top of the food chain, keystone species. Specifically, she was focused on the decimation of the wild predatory bird species populations in the continental United States. Protection through immersion. We're talking about, specifically my trip here to Malawi. I was privileged enough to go out and experience the circle of life, to keep with the African Lion King jokes. Once we are exposed to that sort of aspect of life, it's very natural to assign a value to that. Another natural aspect of that would be, to protect something that we find valuable. Obviously, as humans, we would fight to protect something that we value personally. And if the environment is that something, then I believe that's one of the key solutions. So, Teddy Roosevelt, one of the forefathers of American conservation, this quote here: "The nation behaves well if it treats the natural resources as assets which it turns over to the next generation increased and not impaired in value." We're just momentary caretakers of this land that we've already inherited from previous generations. It's our job and our duty to preserve it, to provide to the future generations the same, if not exemplary, environment that we, reside in currently. He actually earmarked over 230 million acres of public land for specific national forest use to never be trespassed or impacted again. So, teddy bears. The phrase was coined in 1902 through a cartoon published in the Washington Post of Teddy Roosevelt here refusing to essentially kill a captured bear. He was an avid hunter, which initially might sound counterintuitive to the conservation movement. However, species population management is absolutely one of the key factors. Shortly after this cartoon was published, a toy manufacturer ran downstairs to his wife and said, "Hey, listen, I need you to make me a teddy bear. Get some felt, make a bear." I'm thankful for Teddy, to Theodore Roosevelt, for his conservation first mindset, as well as his contribution to my children's upbringing. So, in conclusion, through learning from the past, education, and further understanding of our impact on this environment, a change can be made as it has been before. We're talking about the Everglades, the banning of DDT and other harmful pesticides, as well as maintaining that conservation first movement. It does start at home with every consumer that we have in America has a part in this movement. Thank you.